Today I'd like to show you how to make a macro inside DaVinci Resolve in the Fusion page. So we're going to learn how to make this macro. This macro has the ability to adjust the outer width and the outer height, and you can also change the inner width and the inner height, and then also you can select whatever color you'd like. So this is the custom tool that we're going to make. So first, let's start from scratch. And the first thing I'm going to do is bring in a rectangle node, and I'm going to call this outer rectangle. And let's display this on the left screen. So we have just a simple mask where opaque is white and transparent is black. Next is I'm going to make an inner rectangle that's a little bit smaller, and what we'll do is we'll kind of cut the two together. We'll take the overlap. So let me bring in another rectangle. Let me rename this inner rectangle. And this one, I'm going to make it, instead of a width of a half and height of a half, I'm going to make width of 0.45 and height of 0.45. There we go. Let's display this on the right. Now here, what we want to do, it's hard to tell, but this rectangle is slightly smaller than that. In fact, what I might do to make it a little more apparent, so it's obvious, I'll make it significantly smaller. I'll make it 40% height and width of the screen. So you can see the left rectangle is larger than the one on the right. I'm first going to invert the one on the right. So we now have two different masks. If we were to find where they overlap, we would get a nice white rectangle that's transparent outside and transparent inside. And one way you can combine two different masks is just link one into the other, so chain them together. But when we combine them, we want to pick how we want to combine them. And to find the intersection, we can multiply them. And that's because when you multiply two masks, it multiplies them pixel by pixel. And here with these masks, transparent is 0 and opaque is 1. So the only time we're going to get white is when it's white on both the left mask and the right mask, which results in having the intersection. And let's not worry too much about that, because you could go down a big rabbit hole of masking and combining different things. Lastly, now that we have a mask that we like, a mask that has a frame, let's give it some color. So I'm going to bring in a background node, and I'm just going to call this frame color. Let's pipe this in, and we'll display this on the right. In fact, we'll go ahead and hide the left so we can keep our focus here. And the default of background is always black, and I'm going to change it to a dark green. And then lastly, we'd want to have a media out to finish the composition. And let's rename media out to tool output. There we go. So here we have a simple device, a simple thing that we might want to reuse. And the way you can reuse this, there's several ways. A basic way is to select the nodes you'd like to reuse, right click, and say go to settings and save all as. And we could call this a custom frame. When you do this, it creates a file called customframe.setting. And when you open it, it looks quite a bit like a JSON file if you're familiar with that data file from working with computers or programming. But even if you don't know JSON, you can kind of see you have name equal value. And so this contains all the information necessary to recreate what we just did. So to demonstrate that, if we came over here, selected these three and deleted them, then what we can do is come up to the customframe.setting file, drag it into Fusion, and there are the three nodes. We just bring the output tool a little bit closer and then connect them together, and we're back to where we started. So that's one way you can save the work that you've been doing in Fusion, is just select the nodes, save it as a .setting file, and whenever you want to reuse it, just drag and drop it in. But what we'd like ideally to have is something that acts as a really nice tool. So what I mean by that is if you come to the edit page, look at the effects, and let's just pick something like, let's pick noise gradient, and we drag that in. And if we select this and look at the inspector, there are a lot of controls over here that allow you to customize how this is going to look. You can adjust the level of detail in this, the contrast as well. Every single effect that we have over here will have to some degree or another, different ways to change its appearance. For example, with a solid color, you can just come over here and change what color it should be. But there's a whole host of things. For example, if you make a left lower third title, this is a macro, and there's quite a few controls over here. There's two lines of text, and each one can be controlled independently. So it has all the typical text controls. That's really what you want to be able to do. So if we come back here, we'd like to be able to use these three in combination, just like that. And that's what macros do. So you select the nodes that you want to create a macro from, right-click, come up to the macro option, and click Create Macro. The first thing you want to do is give your macro a name. I'm going to call this a colored frame. And let's come over here and collapse this. So you see here, there are 3 nodes, and that's because we have 3 nodes in our composition: outer rectangle, inner, and frame color. And when you expand them, by the way, notice how this is red and these aren't. If it's red, that means there's some part of that node that will be included in the macro controls. If you expand frame control, it's the output, which makes sense. You want to have an output in your macro. But if you expand outer rectangle, nothing's checked. That's why it's gray. The moment you select something, it changes to red. If nothing's selected, it changes to gray. Now, what we would like to be able to do is change the width, the thickness, and the color of this frame. So that means in the outer rectangle, we want to be able to control the width and height. And then for the inner rectangle, we'd also like to be able to control the width and height. And then for the frame color, we definitely want an output to this tool, but we also want to be able to change the color. And if we collapse these sub menus, see here we have image color common. That corresponds to, if you come to this node, there's color, image, and settings. So there's color that matches color, image matches image, but every node has the settings, and that's what's called common here. So that unfortunately the names don't match there. We want to be able to change the color. Okay, if we look over here, the color that we have right now is a dark green, which has a red 0, green of 0.3 repeating, and a blue of 0. This is the color used. So there's 4 different types of colors that this control can use, and that's because you can also make a 4 gradient background. But we only want a solid color, and it's not clear which to use, but when you're working with a solid color, you're actually using the top left color fields. And that's why it has top right, bottom left, bottom right, and this is just color. So we want color and the green and the blue. So we want to be able to control the color of this as well. Now that we've selected what we would like to be included in our custom tool and to our custom node, we can hit close, and it asks if you'd like to save it. We would. Let's click yes, and then you go where you would like to save it. I'm going to save it in my demo fusion folder, and right now it's called colored frame. Let's keep that name and click save. Now if we open this file, we have the colored frame.setting file. If we open this, I want to point out one thing, which is a very subtle difference, but it is a very useful difference to know, especially when you want to make changes to macros. The very first thing we looked at was the custom frame, and it had just the list of tools that we had. We had 3 tools, and this just contains the information about the 3 nodes that we had in our composition. When you look at the colored frame macro, there's something else here. There's the macro operator, and underneath that, it has the list of the controls that our macro will have. If you scroll down, you'll then see the list of the 3 nodes that we use. This file contains a little more information. There's the macro operator section, and that contains the list of controls that we select to be included in our node. In our case, we have the width and height of the outer rectangle, the width and the height of the inner rectangle, and then the color. But in addition to this, let me go ahead and collapse this section. There is an output. So we did want to have an output to our macro, and every macro has that. And then it has a list of the tools, the outer rectangle, inner rectangle, and frame color. By looking at this file in Visual Studio Code, it just gives us a few little nice features. We can focus on the main structure of this file, and that is we have a macro operator, and it has inputs, which are the controls that you can use to change this behavior. It has an output, and then it has a list of the 3 nodes. So There we go. Now that we've created this, let's see how to use it. One way is you can also drag and drop again. So let's go ahead and delete this, bring up our file, which was called colored frame, and drag it in. Notice it doesn't display all three nodes that we have. It just displays the colored frame node. And if you look over here on the controls on the upper right, you'll see that it has the width and height and color tools. Let's see if it works. If we come up to the top width, yes, we can adjust the width of the outer rectangle and the height of the outer rectangle. And then also there's the width and the height of the inner rectangle. And then also you can change the color of this as well. So let's pick something a little more interesting. There we go. I guess that's interesting. So this does work. This acts as just our own custom frame. There's a few things though that you would like to do to take this to the next level. One is the name of these parameters, the name of these inputs aren't ideal. We have width, height, width, height. Well, which is which? If you just gave this to a video editor and they came and they wanted to use this, this would be very confusing. Ideally, we'd like to specify this is the width and height of the outer rectangle, and this is the width and height of the inner. So how can we do that? Let's go ahead and delete this. If we return to the file colored frame, I didn't find this documented, but I kind of was able to figure it out. For the color, notice there's this one field called name is color, but for the other inputs like the width, height, there's no name. So I realized this is something you can add to make it a little more customizable. So I'm going to come up here to the outer rectangle width, and I'm going to give this a name of outer width. And notice how I end with a comma. All these rows end with a comma in here. And we'll come over here to the outer rectangle height and give this a name of outer height. And now let's look at the inner rectangle node and the width. Let's call this name is inner width. And this one will be similarly called name is inner height. Save this, return to Fusion, and we're going to drag and drop this file over. Now, if you look at the controls first, let's display it in a screen 2. It shows outer width, outer height, inner height. And here is frame color, but color is a good thing. So we now have the controls that we chose, and we renamed them to be more user-friendly. But there's one other thing we'd like to be able to do, and that is it would be nice if we could access our tool from this menu, rather than having to do drag and drops from somewhere on the file system into Fusion. It would be nice if we just had shortcuts here. So how do we do that? Well, let's come back to Fusion here. If you come up to Help, go to Documentation, and click on Developer. There's a folder here called Fusion Templates. If you open that, there's a README file. Open that. In this README file, there's a lot of instructions on how to build a macro, and it's totally worth reading this. Once you've gained experience creating a few macros, this will answer a lot of questions that you might have along the way. Here they give instructions on how to build it. They talk about how to create your custom icons and things like that, how to bundle them. What we're interested in is template paths. So it says these .setting files, the file that we made, the colored frame.setting file, where do you put that so that there's a shortcut available to you in the DaVinci Resolve interface? This tells you where to put it. I'm on Windows, but they also have the paths for Mac and Linux. For me, it's going to be this path here. In my case, the username is Socratica, but I will go ahead and copy this. I will open Windows Explorer, and I'll just paste that path in, and I'm going to replace my username with the username on my computer is Socratica. There we go. This brings us to where we want to put it. And notice there's 4 possible folders to put it in: effects, generators, titles, and transitions. If you return to DaVinci Resolve and go to either the edit or cut page, either's fine. On the edit page, if you open Toolbox, you'll see there's 2 types of transitions, video and audio. We're interested in video because we're working with Fusion. We have video transitions, titles, generators, and effects. Those corresponds to transitions, titles, generators, and effects. We could put them in anywhere. Let's just go ahead and put it in generators because it generates something, although I could easily see making this a title as well. Either's fine. In fact, let's go ahead and make it a title. So if we go in here, this folder is empty. So we just need to make a copy of our .setting file and put it in there. I'm going to come over here and select colored frame.setting, copy it and paste it in here. And now what you want to do is you want to restart Resolve for it to appear in the menu. It won't appear right away. So let me go ahead and close this and restart Resolve. And we're back. So here we are on the edit page once more, and we're going to go underneath Toolbox, select Titles, and we're going to scroll down and look for a colored frame title. And in fact, we could actually search for it here. I forgot I actually have quite a few things installed here, but if I were to scroll to the bottom, let's see, where would it be? It might be under, there it is, colored frame. And notice when I mouse over it and do a hover scrub, it displays the default. By default, we use a particular shade of green and a certain size, and that is going to be the default that will display when you mouse over the tool here or the title. And now we can drag it in. It is showing up nicely. Now, I'd like to point out one thing. One is we drag and dropped it into the edit page, and the controls are just here, just like we wanted. Here's the other thing I want to point out, that if we come over to Fusion, notice that it has our effect leading into a media out. Now, that's important. When we created this setting file, we did not include a media out node when we saved it. In fact, if we reopen it, we will see that, let me scroll down, the three nodes that are included were the outer rectangle, the inner rectangle, and the frame color. We didn't include the output. But in DaVinci Resolve, when you take one of these presets, in our case, our colored frame preset, and you dragged it onto the timeline, it goes ahead and creates a media out and wires it in for you. That's one reason why you don't want to include a media out in your macro, because DaVinci Resolve is going to go ahead and create one and connect them for you. So there we go. And we have all the custom tools that we need right there. So to recap, to create a macro, you're going to build your composition, select the nodes that you want to include in your macro, and you right click, come up to macro and save. When you do that, you will get that pop-up where you go through and pick those parameters that you want to appear in the inspector, so that people can customize the composition to their liking. And once you do that and save it, you get a setting file. And what we learned is when you open the file, not all the parameters, not all the inputs that appear will have a name. By default, it'll use the name for that particular node. And in our case, we had multiple nodes called width and height. That's why you can add your own name to each one and just give it a more user-friendly name. And once we did that, we got a nice appearing parameter panel, customization panel over here. And then finally, to know where to put it so that it's available on the effects menu, you just come up to Help, Documentation, Developer, go into Fusion Templates, because we made this inside Fusion, look at the README, and that will give you the location of where to put it on what type of computer that you're running. That's all for now, and I will see you in the future.